Okay, so the first stage of building the timer is to take some of these components and prepare them, and that means perhaps shortening and tinning certain parts. So we'll start with the JST Pigtail. Like we said, we want to mount the timer or insert the timer on this black negative wire between the motor and the battery. So what we'll do is we'll cut this and at a suitable place for us to mount the timer. So we cut it and we'll strip each end and just tin those ready for the timer. We'll keep the small length that we cut because that will form the join between the timer and the motor as well. And we do the same with them. We'll just remove some of the insulation and tin those wires. Give the wires a little twist and we'll use some liquid flux just to speed up the process. These are little holders, basically just a peg glued to a piece of wood, but it's very handy for this kind of thing. Makes life significantly easier. A little bit of liquid flux. Do put the lid on the flux. You will be surprised how many times I've spread the stuff all over the desk when I've forgotten about it. So we make sure we have a clean and hot soldering iron, and this is really basic soldering skills. Heat under the wire so that the actual heat on the metal of the wire is what melts the solder. You don't want a cold joint. Watch the heat. These wires are definitely over specification for the Ferry 500 motor, which draws something like 1.7 amps on the standard propeller. As a result of that, these wires are a little bit likely to suck up a lot of solder and can go rigid, so don't overdo the solder. It's quite possible to do these without flux. Just takes slightly longer because there's obviously flux in the solder, in the core of the solder as well. So preparing and tinning all of these components is definitely worth the time because it means that things go together very quickly later down the line. And really you're not doing any more than reheating what's already there. Not really adding much more solder when you start to build the components together. So there we have the pigtail and its little extra piece ready. So the next thing to do is to prepare and tin the FET. Now these small terminals here, we have 3 terminals. We don't need that short middle one because that terminal is the same as the back plate of the FET. We're going to actually attach to the back plate, not to that little one. So we don't have to, but we can remove that little terminal, just snip it off. It just prevents us from getting any solder bridges that we don't want. Now I do like to just straighten out the terminals so that the capacitor sits on them a little bit more comfortably. Not really necessary to do, but it just makes it slightly easier to fit the capacitor on. Now we tin these. This is where the little jigs and things can come in useful. Would suggest that you do use flux for this because it means less heat on the actual components. I've never, as far as I'm aware, never broken one of these by overheating them. They're very nice to work with. So again, equipment will stay together. A little bit of heat. A little bit of solder, not too much, just enough to tin. Then we'll turn the over and we'll tin this back plate. Now this takes slightly longer. We'll just use a little bit of flux. You'll certainly know when it's ready because you'll end up with flowing of solder. That's the FET prepared. Now we have to do the same with the capacitor. These components, they're very nice to work with, as I say, but it is worth just doing all of this properly. It makes life much easier down the way. A little bit of solder. These tend to pick up because of the surface tension of the solder. So sometimes I use a piece of double-sided tape to stick them down. Get a bit gooey when the heat's on it, but really just a quick dab of solder is all you need, as long as the iron is nice and clean and you're quite quick. But you can pick these up with the iron if you're not careful. There we are, just a dab of solder on either terminal. And that's enough for now. The Schottky diode and the resistor, they actually need to be shortened. We use the legs of one of each as the terminals for the timer. So we're actually going to shorten the diode and we're going to bend the resistor around and clip that so that it fits that side. If you were building one of these without the Schottky diode, you would use both legs of the resistor. So as you can see, that will fit around the capacitor. And now it's important that we cut the right side of the diode. The black stripe should go towards the timer, and we'll just cut off a length, something like that, enough to attach it to the capacitor. So there we have the components ready to go, including our pigtail, a little piece, and our components. So just a little close-up for you, showing the trimming of these two components. The resistor and the Schottky diode these legs will form the terminals for the zap of the 9-volt battery. And the next stage is to put these all together, and the key to that is a good little jig.